Today on Locked On Rockies, trading the fan favorite this time was actually the right call.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked On Rockies podcast for today, the 20th day of December in the year 2022. I am your host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, Paul Holden, bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team every day. If your team is the Colorado Rockies, well, guess what? You are in the right spot. You're exactly where you need to be. That's what we do around here each and every day, is talk about the Colorado Rockies. If you want to be part of the show, you can follow us on the social media platforms. You can also join in on the live chat, just like Nicholas is every day, right here on the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to Locked On Rockies on YouTube, you'll know when we go live. So you can jump into the live chat, ask your questions, and be part of the show. If you're curious who this guy is, who's this bumbling idiot? Well, I'm not a bumbling idiot. I just like to make fun of myself sometimes. I am Paul Holden, your Rockies fan extraordinaire. Been following this team my entire life and bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies talk here for over 2 seasons now. Today on the Locked On Rockies podcast, we're going to talk about how the Rockies trade a fan favorite away, but this time it makes sense. Folks, as much of it was a bummer, and as much of it was a bummer to see it kind of play out in real time, last season, the Rockies unfortunately did not have space for Connor Joe. Connor Joe is one of those players that makes you love baseball. He's a classic case of someone that was given an opportunity, took advantage of the opportunity, and then just kind of realized the longevity wasn't there, at least for the Rockies. And now it kind of goes full circle. He goes back to the Pirates, and he's going to get an opportunity to play. If you're upset about losing Connor Joe, you can take solace in the fact that he's going to play in Pittsburgh. He's going to go out and he's going to be someone that plays outfield for Pittsburgh every day, or close to every day, probably. That wasn't the case for the Rockies. He just fell off completely last year. And I mean, the fall off was so bad that he really didn't get any playing time. I mean, it's something that the Rockies just couldn't have turned to this year. This year, like we've talked about before, and I've seen other people point this out, it seems like the Rockies are making the statement of, we're looking at what we have right now. We are going to see what these prospects actually are capable of. We're going to see how much of a foundation we can build off of these prospects. And Connor Joe just wasn't going to fit that plan. Connor Joe, unfortunately, blocks all of your prospects. The big issue is that Connor Joe simply wasn't performing enough, especially at the end of the season, and to give you enough of, you got to keep him in the lineup. He was the same thing where it was with Sam Hilliard and Garrett Hampson, where it's, I've seen them. I've seen enough of them. I know what I'm getting when these players are up to bat and when they're in the game. Now it's time for me to see Sean Bouchard. Sean Bouchard is the most interesting part of this whole thing, because if he's the random one that really performs, if he's the one that kind of continues to be one of the more consistent parts of this new prospect rotation, of this new prospect group coming up that's going to see considerable playing time, then that really makes things interesting. Really makes things interesting because of, where are you going to put these players? Are they going to be good enough to fully take over? Again, that is our big, big question of the offseason. We've kind of circled back throughout the offseason already on, are these prospects going to be ready to play? And we can sit here and actually develop good kind of thought processes and ideas of what these prospects are capable of, because we got to see them so much at the end of the season last year. It's so nice. I mean, again, when I'm saying it's so nice, it's in the vacuum of positive things for the Rockies and positive things to look for. Is the Rockies let the kids play at the end of last year and in the second half of the season. That's important, because when we're sitting here and saying, why is Connor Joe gone? Why are the Rockies trading Connor Joe? I mean, are we really that confident that the Rockies are going to be able to fill that hole of what he was doing? And the answer, at least you can say in the simple case, was yeah. I mean, in just 74 at bats, we got an idea that Sean Bouchard can kind of do everything that Connor Joe was capable of doing. And obviously it's kind of a tough way to compare when there's so much at bats, but Connor Joe in 467 plate appearances, 238, 338, 359, 697 line with an OPS plus of 88. And I mean, the big thing with Connor Joe was that average was so much higher at one point. In 63 games with the Rockies, he had a 285 batting average in 2021, and he started striking out. Not only did he more than double his strikeouts in the fact, and I kind of double things when it's pretty close. 63 plate appearances to under 11. I know the math isn't one for one. So I kind of just try to multiply things in my brain just as a simple way to look at it. I don't necessarily know if that's the best way, but the regression is there. Connor Joe was on track to strike out more. Connor Joe only racked up in double the plate appearances. If you would hope that his hit total would kind of get doubled and things that nature and get close, but unfortunately it didn't. The trends were downward for Connor Joe. Whereas Sean Bouchard, 74 at-bats, 297 average, 454 OPP, OPS of 954, 22 hits, 3 of them home runs, 11 RBIs. You can now sit and say that Sean Bouchard is the one you turn to. The numbers show that Sean Bouchard's, while Connor Joe had more appearances and more this, Sean Bouchard was ready to go. Now, Sean Bouchard could come in and there's film on him and people make adjustments. But when you're kind of looking for the next Connor Joe, the player that kind of came out of nowhere, the player that comes under the radar and then has an impact, Sean Bouchard might be that guy. He's really an interesting case for the Rockies next year, especially when those are solid numbers. 21 walks for Sean Bouchard to 25 strikeouts. He was almost walking more than he was striking out in that limited time. Connor Joe, for comparison, 55 walks to 97 strikeouts there. So it's not 1-to-1, sure. But why, when you ask yourself the question, why trade Connor Joe? It's because you got to free up that spot so Sean Bouchard and the like can play. Let's dive into the live chat here to answer questions, to get your reaction to Connor Joe being traded. But before we do that, got to tell you about the people that help make this show possible, and that includes Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis, even future odds, or bets, I should say. If you want to go check out what the Rockies are going to do, or if you want to check out some of the early MLB futures, they got all sorts of stuff gearing up for the football playoffs and all sorts of stuff at Bet Online. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. That includes pro football. That includes basically everything, folks. Even the amateurs, even it's bowl season. If you want to get in on the bowl betting action, Bet Online is the place to go. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about betonline.net. Bet Online, where the game starts. You can be part of the live chat here, just like so many folks are. Eric Harper says, I'll miss Connor, but the trade should pan out okay. Furious MMO says, I was not expecting Joe to be traded. I honestly thought they were going to give him one more year at least to see what happens. And hi to you, Boov Sports. I appreciate you for tuning in here and checking us out. But Here's the deal, Furious MMO, and I don't know if you caught the early part, but the pieces just weren't aligning. And the Rockies added pitching. That is the big takeaway here as well. Rockies, when they trade, especially when you're trading a player like Connor Joe, you should get pitching back. Going out and getting a low A pitcher to come and try to develop and give yourself some time, that's the type of trade you should get for Connor Joe. It shouldn't be done for cash considerations. It shouldn't be done for things of that nature. If you're going to trade someone like Connor Joe that's going to bring some value and immediate value to a team, Connor Joe is a starter for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I mean, for the Joe fans out there, that's something to remember too, is that the right trade with the right partner, if they have a space what they desperately need, Pittsburgh needs outfielders, and what can Connor Joe do? He can play outfield because they got a bunch of first basemen over there, and Connor Joe's not that great at first base. So going out and sending Connor Joe to Pittsburgh and taking a flyer on a young arm, that's the way to do it. If you're not going to go and try to make a splash with some of your bigger names, if you're going to trade away some of these pieces, that's the way to do it. Go after the pitching. Go after for the lottery ticket pitching, because if it takes trading a utility bench player that you like that isn't going to get a lot of playing time, opens the door for a sneaky good prospect, a solid arm at best, someone that you can look towards the future and see what's going to happen. Because you can't really do that with a lot of the Rockies. There's not anybody in the Rockies minor league system of pitching prospects that gets you very, very excited. And I don't think this Connor Joe trade brought us over a pitcher that we are going to have our socks blown off with. The numbers don't suggest that, but at least opens the door for that unicorn that you never know with pitching. And you never know with hitting too, obviously, but with pitching, I think these are smart types of trades. You're not giving up too much. You're beefing up what you desperately need to beef up, which is your minor league pitching system, and planning ahead. This is just a good fundamental move from the Rockies. It's just a bummer it had to be Connor Joe, right? I mean, we all want to sit there. I mean, he really was fun. I mean, Connor Joe is one of those players that brings energy and fun. And when the team is good, he was part of that. When the team was good, Connor Joe was one that was contributing to that. But the writing was on the wall. When Connor Joe is not getting playing time at the end of the year, it's not just because he's a little banged up too, but it's because the Rockies were looking and assessing options and decided to let the kids play. And that's not a bad thing. If you're going to trade Connor Joe, going out and getting some arms for it and seeing what can happen from there, that's the right way to do it. And let's get a little bit of insight into the Rockies traded for here as we're going to head over to MLB.com. I'm trying to see. Let's see. Okay. Nick Garcia, 23. That's who the Rockies traded Joe for. Was a third-round selection by the Pirates in 2022 in the 2022 draft. In 2022, he had a 3.66 ERA and a 4.89 FIP with 109 strikeouts across 113 innings. Joe was selected by it's kind of interesting. Yeah, if you didn't know that Connor Joe was originally drafted by the Pirates, he's actually going to go back and make his finally make his debut. But that's a fine stat line. That is someone that that we can that you're like, okay, let's see what this prospect does. But the one thing that we have to see replicated from the Rockies offense is the patience at the plate. The Rockies, Connor Joe, when he was locked in, was someone that was very good at taking pitches. He was someone that was very good at drawing out at bats. He was someone that kind of would slow the game down a little bit for the Rockies offense and allow them to get back in it with just good, solid plate discipline. And I just love that. That's something you love about hitting, especially in today's day and age, finding the right pitch for you. finding your pitch and taking advantage of it and mashing it. That's what you got to do. You can't sit and be too selective, obviously, but it's so hard to get the right pitch. And it's so hard to be able to wait back and get your pitch. That is something that Connor Joe can do. That is something the Rockies are going to have to try to replicate or get from their other players, is someone that's going to have the habit and be ready to and willing to draw out those at-bats and draw out walks and get on base that way. And again, Sean Bouchard kind of showed you that. 20 what do we let's go back. 21 walks in 27 games. Almost walking more than he was striking out. Had a couple of bad days where he was striking out a lot at the end of the year for Bouchard. But that's right there. You know, again, is he's the younger guy. You can see what happens, and he might provide a little bit more thump in the lineup than Connor Joe is offering. Your questions and more here on the Locked On Rockies podcast coming up, as well as an update about the pod in just a moment. Thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We are free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. You can find us just by searching Locked On Rockies wherever you are. You can find us there streaming. You can find us on YouTube, and you can be part of the live chat where we answer your Rockies questions live here. No questions in the chat right now, but there's excitement building about the younger players, and that's what you need to have for the Rockies. If you're going to watch and follow the Rockies this year, the big thing you need to focus on and the big thing you need to look at are the prospects. What are those four main prospects going to do, and what can the Rockies rotation do with a new year, with something? Those are kind of my big off-season storylines, because the market's getting thinner and thinner. It depends. You know, the Rockies didn't re-sign Adam Ottavino, for example. He goes back to the Mets. There are still options for the Rockies to go out there and do bigger-ish moves. But I think we're seeing it. And I think that this move right here, again, by trading Connor Joe, you are solidifying, you are building, you are creating the space for these prospects to play. Connor Joe, that's now with Sam Hilliard, Garrett Hampson, and Connor Joe no longer on the Colorado Rockies. You have to fill your utility space. You have to fill your bench depth, and you have to make sure that you have players that can play those positions. And that's what the Rockies are looking at right now. They're looking at the fact that they have plenty of outfield prospects. They're looking at the fact that they have players that are going to fill the infield. This will be a young Rockies team next year, and that's not a bad thing. In reality, it's like we've talked about. This is an identity. This is a rebuild, quote unquote, mindset. I don't know if rebuild's even really the right word to you to use for this, because they haven't fully torn it down, even though they've moved on from most of their biggest names outside of the signing of Chris Bryant and the extensions of the rotation. But it's another sign that the Rockies are going to let the kids play, and I don't think that's a bad thing for next year. If you weren't going to buy in more into this crazy market and bring in a few pieces, and since you've missed out on some of the more prominent one-year deals, these are the type of moves and that you should expect to see the Rockies to do, because it's more realistic for that. Furious MMO says, I still think it wasn't smart for the Rockies not to re-sign Ottavino when we had him. I think Adam Ottavino joins a long list of Rockies that would have been fine. And I think we're going to be sent to bring back. John Gray was that last year. And I think you're going to see that here this season with Carlos Estevez. I think the Rockies are going to miss Carlos Estevez. I think that is, I mean, we haven't dove in. We'll do more of a deeper dive into the new look Rockies bullpen, because there are a lot of new names, a lot of new faces in this Rockies bullpen next year, and they're not all just young guys from the Rockies system. But you could definitely add Adam Ottavino to the list of Rockies players that should have been with the Rockies a lot longer than they were, because Adam Ottavino was good, if not great, for the Colorado Rockies. You all have been great. The live chat's been wonderful. This has been another great episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast, where you can find us breaking down your team every day, and that's the Colorado Rockies. That's what we do. We love the Colorado Rockies around here. So thank you so much for tuning in and following the Locked On Rockies on your favorite YouTube or social media platforms. Here's just a quick update on the show. We're officially in off-season mode, so plan to see the show unless news breaks Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday until pitchers and catchers report. It's a little bit of a break for us, which is kind of honestly a little bit nice for me. Catch my breath a little bit, get prepared for the next season. And as you all know, there's not a ton going on right now. So just so you are wondering what's going on, plan for the Locked On Rockies podcast, streaming live right here on Locked On Rockies on YouTube. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday here as we navigate the offseason up until pitchers and catchers report. However, Rockies news breaks, big something happens, the Rockies go out and make a major blockbuster, something crazy. We'll be right here. We'll be breaking it down, of course, on the Locked On Rockies podcast. And thank you so much to Furious MMO, Eric Harper, Nicholas Delvo, and first-time chatterer there, Boov, on the Boov Sports. Folks, until next time, this is Paul Holden saying so long from the Locked On Rockies podcast.